Morgan Blake. Entry number 006. The Devil's Music Box. What if I told you that some songs stay with you forever, whether you want them to or not? Stick around until the end to discover the chilling truth behind the cursed melody of an old music box. Have you ever wondered what happens when a seemingly harmless object, like a music box, harbors a darkness so deep it drives people to the brink of madness? This is the story of one such object, a music box once owned by a notorious criminal, believed to be cursed. They say it plays a tune that lingers in your mind, twisting your thoughts, haunting your dreams, until you can't escape its grasp. I've been an investigator for over 20 years, specializing in cases that others shy away from, cases that dance on the edge of the supernatural, where reality blurs with the inexplicable. This is one of those cases, one that left a mark on me, a mark that I carry to this day. It all began on a rainy October evening. I was in my office, a small, dimly lit room cluttered with files, books, and the tools of my trade. The rain pattered against the windows, creating a rhythm that echoed the unsettling feeling in my gut. I was going through some old case files when the phone rang. The voice on the other end was a woman, her tone filled with desperation and fear. She introduced herself as Claire Dalton, a name that would soon become etched in my memory. Claire's voice trembled as she explained her situation. She had recently come into possession of an old music box, a family heirloom passed down through generations. At first, she thought it was a beautiful piece of history, a relic from a bygone era. But soon after she brought it into her home, strange things began to happen. It started with the music. The box would play on its own, a haunting melody that filled the house even when the lid was closed. The tune, she said, was unlike anything she'd ever heard, beautiful yet sinister, with a way of seeping into her mind, her thoughts, even her dreams. But it wasn't just the music that troubled Claire. She began to see things, shadows moving in the corners of her vision, fleeting figures that disappeared when she turned to look. The sense of being watched grew stronger with each passing day. Her children, she told me, were waking up in the middle of the night, crying, terrified of something they couldn't explain. And then there were the whispers, soft, unintelligible at first, but growing clearer, more insistent. The voice was calling her name. Claire was convinced that the music box was cursed, that it was the source of the horrors plaguing her family. She begged me to take the case, to find out what was wrong with the box and how to rid her family of its influence. Normally, I would have been skeptical, chalking it up to an overactive imagination or a series of coincidences. But something about Claire's voice, the sheer terror in her words, made me think twice. There was a darkness here, something that couldn't be explained away so easily. I agreed to take the case and set up a meeting with Claire at her home the next day. As I hung up the phone, a chill ran down my spine. Little did I know that this case would take me down a path I could never have anticipated, a path that would lead me face to face with a darkness older and more malevolent than I had ever encountered. The following morning, I drove to Claire's home. It was an old Victorian house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by thick woods and shrouded in a perpetual mist. The house itself was grand but worn, with an air of neglect that hinted at the secrets it held within its walls. Claire met me at the door, her face pale and drawn, her eyes haunted. She led me into the parlor, where the music box sat on a wooden table, bathed in the soft light filtering through the lace curtains. It was a beautiful piece, intricately carved with floral patterns and inlaid with mother-of-pearl. But as I approached it, I felt a heaviness in the air, a sense of something wrong. Claire told me everything she knew about the music box. It had been in her family for generations, originally owned by her great-grandfather, a man named Victor Dalton. Victor was a notorious figure in his time, known for his ruthless nature and criminal activities. He was feared by many, and it was rumored that he had dabbled in the occult, making deals with dark forces to amass his wealth and power. The music box had been a gift to Victor from an unknown source, arriving mysteriously at his doorstep one night. From the moment he received it, strange things began to happen. Victor became obsessed with the music box, playing its tune over and over, often late into the night. His personality began to change. He grew more paranoid, more violent. Those close to him claimed they could hear voices coming from the box, whispering in a language they couldn't understand. Victor's health deteriorated rapidly, and within a year, he was dead. His death was sudden and violent, but the details were shrouded in mystery. The music box was passed down through the family, and each owner met a similarly tragic fate. Claire had inherited the music box from her grandmother, who had warned her never to wind it. But curiosity got the better of her, and one day, she did. That was when the strange occurrences began, the music playing on its own, the shadows, the whispers. Claire was convinced that the music box was cursed, that it carried a darkness within it that had plagued her family for generations. As she spoke, I examined the music box more closely. It was old, no doubt about that, but there was something more to it, something that felt alive. The carvings on the box seemed to shift and change under the light, and I could almost hear the faintest echo of the melody it played, even though the box was closed. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as I realized that Claire's fears were not unfounded. This was no ordinary music box. It was something far darker. I decided to take the music box back to my office, where I could study it more thoroughly. Claire was more than willing to part with it, her relief palpable as I carried the box out of her house. But as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The further I got from Claire's home, the stronger the feeling became. By the time I reached my office, it felt as though a pair of eyes were boring into the back of my skull. I placed the music box on my desk and sat down, staring at it. The room was quiet, the only sound the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the corner. I tried to focus, to gather my thoughts, but my mind kept drifting back to the music box, to the melody I had heard in my head earlier. It was a tune I couldn't place, beautiful, yes, but with an underlying note of dread that sent shivers down my spine. I decided to do some research on Victor Dalton, to see if there was any truth to the stories Claire had told me. I spent hours poring over old newspaper articles, digging through archives, and making phone calls. What I found only deepened the mystery. Victor Dalton had indeed been a powerful and feared man in his time, but his death was shrouded in secrecy. The official cause of death was listed as a heart attack, but there were rumors, whispers of something far more sinister. I learned that Victor had been involved in several unsolved murders, each more brutal than the last. But what caught my attention was the strange pattern that emerged. Each of the victims had been found with a look of sheer terror on their faces, their eyes wide open, as though they had seen something beyond comprehension in their final moments. And then there were the witnesses, those who had been close to Victor in his final days. Each of them reported hearing the same haunting melody, playing from the music box, even when they were nowhere near it. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that the music box was at the center of it all. It was as if the box itself was an extension of Victor's malevolence, a vessel for the darkness he had embraced. And now, it was in my possession. As the night wore on, I grew increasingly uneasy. The shadows in the room seemed to lengthen, and the ticking of the clock grew louder, more insistent. I found myself glancing over my shoulder, convinced that something was lurking just out of sight. The air grew colder, and the oppressive feeling of being watched intensified. And then, I heard it, the melody. Faint at first, but growing louder, more insistent. It wasn't coming from the music box, but from somewhere within the room. My heart began to race as I realized that I was hearing the same tune that had haunted Victor Dalton, the same tune that had driven his descendants to madness. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls pressing in as the melody filled my mind, drowning out all other thoughts. I knew I had to get rid of the music box, to destroy it before it could do any more harm. but I was also driven by a need to understand, to know what it was about this box that made it so dangerous. I was walking a fine line between curiosity and madness, and I wasn't sure which side I would end up on. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to visit the last living relative of Victor Dalton, a man named Henry Dalton, who lived in a dilapidated mansion on the outskirts of town. Henry was an old man, well into his 90s, and had been a recluse for most of his life. He was rumored to be the last keeper of the family's dark secrets, the only one who knew the full story behind the music box. The mansion was a crumbling relic of the past, surrounded by overgrown gardens and a rusted iron gate that creaked ominously as I pushed it open. The air was thick with decay, and the wind carried the faint scent of something rotting. I made my way to the front door, my footsteps echoing in the silence. Henry Dalton met me in the grand foyer, a frail figure dressed in an old-fashioned suit, his eyes sharp and filled with a lifetime of secrets. He didn't seem surprised to see me, as if he had been expecting my arrival. Without a word, he led me down a darkened hallway, the walls lined with portraits of the Dalton family, their eyes following me as I passed. We entered a small, dimly lit room at the end of the hall. It was cluttered with old books, papers, and artifacts from a bygone era. In the center of the room, on a pedestal, sat another music box, identical to the one I had taken from Claire's home. The sight of it sent a chill down my spine. Henry motioned for me to sit, his voice raspy and filled with the weight of years as he began to speak. He told me the story of Victor Dalton, of how the music box had come into his possession, and of the dark pact Victor had made. According to Henry, the music box was no ordinary object. It was a conduit, a link to something far older and more powerful than any human could comprehend. Victor had made a deal with this entity, trading his soul for wealth and power. But the deal came with a price, a curse that would follow his descendants, driving them to madness and death. Henry explained that the music box played a tune that wasn't of this world, a melody that called to the darkness, that opened a door to the other side. Those who heard the melody were drawn into its grasp, their minds twisted, their souls consumed. The shadows, the whispers, the sense of being watched, it was all part of the curse, a manifestation of the entity's influence. As Henry spoke, I felt a growing sense of dread. The air in the room grew thick, and the shadows seemed to shift and move of their own accord. The melody began to play again, faint but unmistakable, as if the music box on the pedestal was coming to life. Henry's voice grew weaker, his words trailing off as he slumped back in his chair, his eyes wide with terror. Before I could react, the room was plunged into darkness. The melody grew louder, more chaotic, and I felt a presence in the room with me, something malevolent, something hungry. I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness as I swept it around the room. But there was nothing there, only the music box, now silent and still. Henry was dead, his face frozen in a mask of fear. I knew then that the curse was real, that the music box was more dangerous than I had ever imagined. And I also knew that I had to destroy it, before it could claim any more lives. I returned to my office, my mind racing with the events of the day. The music box sat on my desk, an ominous presence that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. I knew that I couldn't keep it any longer, that it had to be destroyed. But as I stared at it, I felt a strange compulsion, a pull that I couldn't resist. I reached out and touched the music box, feeling the cold, smooth surface under my fingers. The carvings seemed to shift and change, the patterns twisting into something dark and unrecognizable. I knew I shouldn't, but I couldn't stop myself. I wound the key on the side of the box and lifted the lid. The melody began to play, slow and haunting, the notes echoing in the silent room. It was the same tune I had heard in my mind, the same melody that had driven Victor Dalton to madness. But now, hearing it for real, it was different, more complex, more insidious. The music seemed to seep into my very soul, twisting my thoughts, clouding my mind. I tried to pull away, but it was too late. The shadows in the room grew darker, deeper, and I felt a presence behind me, something cold and malevolent. I turned, but there was nothing there, only the darkness, pressing in on all sides. And then, I saw it, a figure emerging from the shadows, its form twisted and grotesque. It was Victor Dalton, or what was left of him, his eyes hollow, his face contorted in a mask of rage and despair. He reached out towards me, his hand passing through the air like smoke, and I felt a coldness seep into my bones. The melody grew louder, more chaotic, and I realized with horror that the figure was not alone. The room was filled with shadows, with figures that moved and shifted, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. They were the spirits of those who had been claimed by the music box, their souls trapped in an endless cycle of torment. I knew then that I was facing something far beyond my understanding, something that could not be defeated by conventional means. The music box was a gateway, a portal to a realm of darkness and despair, and I was standing at the threshold. Summoning every ounce of willpower, I slammed the lid of the music box shut, silencing the melody. The shadows retreated, the figures dissolving into the darkness, but the sense of dread remained. I knew that I had only bought myself a moment's reprieve, that the entity connected to the music box was still out there, waiting for its chance to strike. I couldn't destroy the music box, not yet. I needed to understand it, to find a way to break the curse once and for all. I spent the next few days researching everything I could about the occult, about the nature of curses, and about the dark entities that haunted the world. But no matter how much I learned, the music box remained an enigma, a puzzle I couldn't solve. The nights were the worst. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the melody, faint but insistent, calling to me. I saw the figures in my dreams, their hollow eyes watching me. I spent the next few hours in that musty room, poring over every detail of the cursed music box's dark history. Each page of the old files seemed to breathe with a life of its own, whispering secrets of the past that should have remained buried. The box had passed through the hands of many, leaving a trail of madness and death in its wake. As I read on, I couldn't help but feel the weight of those tragic stories pressing down on me. The music box had been crafted in the late 1800s by a master artisan, a man named Victor Lafleur, whose skills were said to border on the supernatural. Lafleur was a recluse, known only to a select few wealthy patrons who sought out his exquisite creations. It was said that his works possessed a beauty that could capture the soul, but also a darkness that could consume it. The music box, his final creation, was unlike anything he had made before. It was smaller than most, made of ebony wood and inlaid with delicate silver filigree. The tune it played was haunting, a melody that lingered in the mind long after the music had stopped. The first owner of the box was a noblewoman from France. She had received it as a gift from her husband, who had commissioned Lafleur to create it as a token of his love. But love soon turned to madness. The noblewoman became obsessed with the music box, locking herself away in her chambers, listening to its eerie melody over and over again. Within a year, she was found dead, the box clutched tightly in her hands, her eyes wide with terror. As I read these accounts, I couldn't shake the feeling that the box was more than just an object. It was a conduit for something far darker, something that had been trapped within it for centuries. And now, it was my turn to face whatever malevolent force resided within that cursed box. I traced the music box's journey through history, each step bringing me closer to its current location. The last known owner was a man named Harold Price, a small-time collector of oddities who had acquired the box at an estate sale. Price had been a private man, living alone in a secluded house on the outskirts of town. He had been found dead in his home, the cause of death unknown, with the music box sitting on a table beside him, its lid open, as if it had just finished playing. With this lead in hand, I knew where I had to go next. Price's house had been untouched since his death, and it was there that I would find the music box. The thought of facing that cursed object sent a shiver down my spine, but I had no choice. This was my job, and I had never walked away from a case. As I prepared to leave, I took one last look at the files scattered across the desk. The stories they told were horrifying, but they also served as a warning, a reminder of the dangers that lay ahead. I would need to be careful, to keep my wits about me, and most importantly, to resist the temptation to win the box. The drive to Price's house was uneventful, but the tension in the air was palpable. The sky had turned a dull gray, with thick clouds rolling in, casting the world in shadow. The road leading to the house was narrow and winding, flanked by tall, foreboding trees that seemed to close in around me as I drove. The house itself was an old, dilapidated structure, its paint peeling and windows boarded up. It looked like the kind of place that had been forgotten by time, left to rot and decay in the middle of nowhere. I parked the car and approached the front door, the wooden steps creaking ominously beneath my feet. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying wood, and the wind howled through the trees, making the house groan as if it were alive. I hesitated for a moment, then reached for the door handle. It was unlocked. Inside, the house was dark and musty, with dust covering every surface. The furniture was old and worn, covered in sheets to protect it from the ravages of time. The air was heavy with a sense of abandonment, as if the house itself had given up on life. I made my way through the rooms, the floorboards creaking beneath me, my flashlight casting long shadows on the walls. I found the music box in the living room, sitting on a small table in the center of the room. It was just as the files had described, an ebony box, inlaid with silver, its delicate craftsmanship still intact despite the years of neglect. The sight of it sent a chill down my spine, but I forced myself to approach it. The room was cold, colder than it should have been, and as I drew closer, I could feel a presence in the air, something dark and malevolent, watching me, waiting for me to make a move. The box seemed to hum with energy, as if it were alive, and the urge to wind it, to hear that haunting melody, was almost overwhelming. But I knew better. I knew what had happened to those who had come before me, and I wasn't about to let the box claim another victim. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small cloth, carefully wrapping it around the box. The moment the cloth touched the wood, the air seemed to grow even colder, and I felt a surge of anger, as if whatever was inside the box was furious at being denied. Ignoring the feeling, I wrapped the box tightly and placed it in my bag. The sense of dread didn't leave me, but I pushed it to the back of my mind. I had what I came for, and now it was time to leave. As I turned to go, a sudden noise behind me made me freeze. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable, the sound of a music box being wound. My heart raced as I slowly turned around, expecting to see the box open, its eerie melody filling the room. But the box was still in my bag, untouched. The sound grew louder, echoing through the room, and I realized it wasn't coming from the box, it was coming from somewhere else in the house. I didn't wait to find out where. I bolted for the door, my bag clutched tightly in my hand, the sound of the music box following me as I ran through the darkened house. I didn't stop until I was outside, the door slamming shut behind me, the wind howling through the trees. Breathing heavily, I made my way back to the car and threw the bag into the passenger seat. The house loomed behind me, dark and foreboding, and I could still hear the faint echo of the music box's melody in my ears. Whatever was in that house, it wasn't done with me yet. But I didn't have time to dwell on it. I had the music box, and now I needed to find a way to destroy it. I wasn't about to let it claim another victim, not if I could help it. The drive back was a blur, the road winding endlessly through the dark forest. The sky had grown darker, the clouds thicker, and the wind had picked up, rattling the branches of the trees as if they were trying to grab hold of the car. The sense of dread that had followed me from the house clung to me like a second skin, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I reached my destination just as the first drops of rain began to fall, a small, secluded cabin deep in the woods. It was a place I had used before, a safe house where I could work in peace, away from prying eyes. The cabin was old and weathered, but it was secure, and that was all that mattered. I knew what I had to do. The files had mentioned that the box could only be destroyed by fire, but not just any fire, it had to be a fire fueled by the blood of the innocent. The thought of what I was about to do made my stomach turn, but I had no choice. The box had to be destroyed, no matter the cost. I retrieved the small vial of blood I had brought with me, the blood of a child who had died decades ago, one of the box's many victims. It was a gruesome task, but it was necessary. I poured the blood into the flames, watching as the fire flared up, the flames turning a deep, unnatural red. The box seemed to shudder in my hands, as if it knew what was coming, but I didn't hesitate. I threw the box into the fire, watching as the flames consumed it. The room grew cold, and the air was filled with the sound of the music box's melody, louder than ever, as if the box were screaming in agony. The flames danced and flickered, and the box began to warp and twist, its delicate craftsmanship distorting into something monstrous. Then, with a final, violent crack, the music box exploded into a shower of sparks and ash. The sound of its cursed melody abruptly cut off. The flames roared, consuming the last remnants of the box, leaving nothing but a pile of smoldering embers in the hearth. The room grew eerily silent, the oppressive cold lifting as if whatever dark force had been contained within the box had finally been banished. I stood there, staring into the dying flames, trying to process what had just happened. The sense of dread that had followed me from the house was gone, replaced by a feeling of emptiness, as if something vital had been lost in the destruction of the box. But I knew that the danger was over, that the curse had been broken, and that the music box would never claim another victim. But as I turned away from the fire, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made a terrible mistake. The box was gone, but its legacy of horror and madness remained, a stain on the lives it had touched. I had destroyed the physical object, but could I truly say that the evil it contained had been vanquished? Or had I merely released it into the world, free to find a new form, a new way to torment the living? These questions haunted me as I left the cabin and made my way back to the car. The rain was falling harder now, the sky dark and ominous, and the wind howled through the trees like a chorus of lost souls. I drove in silence, the memory of the music box's melody echoing in my mind, a lingering reminder of the darkness I had confronted. When I returned to my office, I carefully recorded the events of the case in my files, documenting every detail, every unsettling vision, every horrifying discovery. It was a ritual I had followed with every case, a way to make sense of the madness, to keep it at bay. But this time, as I wrote down the final words, I felt a chill run down my spine. The story was complete, but the fear remained, a shadow that would follow me for the rest of my days. As I placed the file in the drawer and locked it away, I couldn't help but wonder what had become of the malevolent force that had inhabited the music box. Had it truly been destroyed, or was it out there somewhere, waiting to strike again? The thought kept me awake that night, the darkness of my room pressing in on me as I lay in bed, the sound of the rain tapping against the window like the soft, insistent notes of a music box. In the end, I knew that I would never have an answer to those questions. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved, some evils not meant to be vanquished. But I had done my duty, had faced the darkness and survived. For now, that would have to be enough. But as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't escape the feeling that this was not the end, but merely the beginning of something far more sinister. The music box was gone, but its legacy would live on, a dark thread woven into the fabric of my life, waiting for the moment when it would resurface and drag me back into the shadows. And as I finally succumbed to sleep, I heard it, the faint, haunting melody of the music box, playing softly in the distance, a reminder that some songs stay with you forever, whether you want them to or not. Morgan Blake. End of entry.